For years, environmental advocates, ourselves included, have pushed one simple message: go vegan to save the planet. It's become almost dogmatic. Cut out all animal products. Anything less is hypocrisy. But after spending weeks pulling emissions data from every major food study published in the last decade, we realized we've been framing this completely wrong. And that bad framing might be why so few people actually change their diets, even when the science is overwhelmingly clear. So we stopped telling people to go vegan for the planet. Not because the science is wrong, but because there's a much simpler story hiding in the data that nobody's talking about. Let's be honest about why the go vegan message doesn't work. First, it feels impossible. People hear, give up cheese, eggs, meat, dairy, everything you've eaten your whole life, and they just don't. The ask is too big. Second, it triggers defensiveness. The vegan movement has earned a reputation, deserved or not, for being moralistic and judgmental. So when someone says, go vegan for climate, people hear, you're a bad person if you don't. And third, the skeptics make reasonable points. Your personal diet choices feel meaningless when systemic change seems so far off. Why should you sacrifice your quality of life for what amounts to a rounding error? These objections aren't stupid. They're actually pretty logical. But here's the thing. They're responding to the framing, not the data. So let's look at what the emissions data actually shows. No ideology, just numbers. We're drawing primarily from a landmark 2018 study published in the journal Science by researchers Joseph Poor at the University of Oxford and Thomas Nemeczek at the Swiss Agricultural Research Institute Agroscope. This meta-analysis consolidated data from 570 studies covering approximately 38,700 commercial farms across 119 countries, making it the most comprehensive food emissions database ever compiled. According to this research, producing 1 kilogram of beef protein generates approximately 50 to 60 kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions. Lamb is similar, around 50 to 60 kilograms. Now compare that to chicken, roughly 6 kilograms per kilogram of protein. Pork, 7 to 8 kilograms. Tofu, about 2 kilograms. Lentils and beans, even lower, around 1 kilogram. Let's make this concrete. Say you eat 100 grams of protein per day, pretty standard for an active adult. If that protein comes entirely from beef, you're generating about 6 kilograms of carbon dioxide per day, just from protein. Over a year, that's more than 2 tons of carbon dioxide. If you switch that same amount of protein to chicken, you drop to around 200 kilograms per year. To legumes, about 36 kilograms per year. That's not a small difference. That's roughly a 60-fold difference between beef and beans. Now here's where it gets interesting. If you eat a typical Western diet, some beef, some chicken, some pork, dairy, eggs, your food-related emissions are probably around 2.5 tons of carbon dioxide per year. Go fully vegan, and you drop that to about 0.5 to 1 ton per year. That's a 50 to 75% reduction. Your total personal carbon footprint, including transport, housing, everything, is probably 10 to 15 tons per year if you live in a developed country. So cutting food emissions in half means reducing your total footprint by roughly 10 to 15%. That's not nothing. That's actually substantial.
Beef is still using 36 times more land and creating 6 times more emissions than beans and peas for the same amount of protein. Converting grass into protein is like converting coal into energy. It comes with an immense cost in terms of emissions. Animal products use over 80% of the world's farmland, contribute 60% of food's greenhouse gas emissions, and 60% of our nitrogen and phosphorus pollution, as well as using a third of the world's water. Despite that, they provide just 37% of our protein and 18% of our calories.
The answer comes down to biology and land use. And it's important to understand this because these figures aren't arbitrary. First, there's enteric fermentation. Cattle, sheep, and goats are what scientists call ruminants, animals with a specialized digestive system that ferments plant material before digesting it. According to the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, microbes in their digestive tract break down food and produce methane as a byproduct. This methane is then released primarily through belching. Ruminants can lose between 2 and 12% of their energy intake through this process alone. Methane is a potent greenhouse gas. According to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, it has a global warming potential roughly 28 to 34 times greater than carbon dioxide over a 100-year period. Research from Our World in Data shows that if you removed methane from beef's carbon footprint, emissions would fall by roughly half, but they'd still be substantial. Chickens and pigs don't have this same digestive system. They don't produce significant methane through digestion. That's a fundamental biological difference that no farming practice can eliminate. Second, there's land use. According to the Poor and Nemesek research, beef production requires vastly more land than other protein sources, both for grazing and for growing animal feed. Stanford University's Woods Institute for the Environment notes that nearly 80% of agricultural land globally is devoted to livestock, despite providing only a minority of our calories and protein. And yes, this includes feed production. Those emissions figures we cited account for what's called life cycle assessment, meaning they include the production, processing, and transportation of animal feed. According to the original study methodology documented by Our World in Data, this encompasses feed crop cultivation, fertilizer application, land use changes, and processing. So when we say beef produces 50 to 60 kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent per kilogram of protein, that includes the soybeans, corn, and other crops grown to feed those cattle. In fact, the Earth.org analysis of this research identified that the majority of deforestation for agriculture, roughly 67%, is for growing products like soy, maize, and pasture for animal feed. The emissions from this land use change are factored into beef's carbon footprint. Third, there's efficiency. Cattle are relatively inefficient converters of feed to meat. According to research published in Global Change Biology, it takes significantly more feed calories to produce a calorie of beef than a calorie of chicken or pork. This inefficiency compounds across every stage of production.
So there are about 500 million farms in the world, and our evidence showed that all of those farmers need slightly different ways to reduce their environmental impacts. For one farm, it might be changing your cropping practices. For another, it might be changing fertilization practices. And one way that farmers could understand their own impacts and how to best reduce them could be through using digital tools that allow them to quantify these impacts and then reduce them.
Look at those numbers again. Beef, 50 to 60 kilograms carbon dioxide equivalent. Lamb, 50 to 60 kilograms. Chicken, 6. Pork, 7 to 8. Notice something? The problem isn't animal products. The problem is beef and lamb specifically, the ruminants. If you just stopped eating beef and lamb, kept eating chicken, pork, eggs, dairy, fish, whatever, you'd still cut your food emissions by roughly 70 to 80% of what you'd achieve by going fully vegan. You don't need to go vegan. You don't need to give up animal products entirely. You just need to stop eating the two worst things. This is why we stop telling people to go vegan for the planet. Not because the science doesn't support plant-based diets. It absolutely does. But stop eating beef and lamb is a radically easier ask than go vegan, and it gets you most of the way there. It removes the all-or-nothing thinking. It removes the identity warfare. It removes the sense that you have to be perfect or you might as well not try. Someone who eats chicken twice a week and plants the rest of the time is doing far more for climate than someone who refuses to change anything because going fully vegan feels impossible. Now, does this mean beef and lamb should be illegal? That everyone who eats them is destroying the planet? No. The world is more complicated than that. Regenerative grazing practices may sequester some carbon in soil. A synthesis of 292 life cycle assessments published in Global Change Biology found that certain land-based carbon sequestration strategies, particularly in Brazil and Latin America, achieved significant reductions in beef's greenhouse gas emissions. But the same research found that net zero emissions were achieved in only 2% of studies examined. Industrial monoculture farming for plant proteins has its own problems. Local food systems matter. Indigenous communities have different relationships with land and animals. And yes, systemic change matters more than individual choices. Policy, infrastructure, agricultural subsidies, those are the real levers. But here's the uncomfortable truth that neither vegans nor skeptics want to hear. Individual choices matter, and they're not enough. Both things are true. You can't consume your way out of a systemic problem. But you also can't ignore the fact that demand drives supply, and what you eat sends a signal. There's another nuance we rarely discuss: the gap between what we call ourselves and what we actually do for the planet. A processed vegan burger shipped across an ocean may leave a heavier footprint than locally raised chicken. Someone who eats plant-based 6 days a week, but has fish on Sundays, might be doing more for the climate than a vegan flying frequently for work. Somewhere along the way, we confuse the label with the impact. And that confusion feeds the very problem we're trying to solve, because demanding purity doesn't change behavior. It shuts people down. The planet doesn't care about your dietary identity. It doesn't keep track of what you call yourself. It responds only to pressure and release, the weight we place on it, and the weight we lift. Veganism is one path toward lifting that weight. It's a meaningful one. But it's not the only path, and the label alone guarantees nothing. What matters is what you actually do. So here's what the data actually says. If you care about climate, the single most effective dietary change you can make is eliminating beef and lamb. Not eliminating all meat. Not going vegan. Just those two. Everything else, chicken, pork, eggs, dairy, fish, Those are secondary decisions you can make based on your own ethics, health goals, or preferences. And wherever your path leads from there, we'll be here exploring it with you. But beef and lamb? The numbers are unambiguous. They're carbon disasters. And unlike flying less or buying an electric car, this is something you can change today. So, we stopped telling people to go vegan for the planet. Because the real message is simpler, more achievable, and almost as effective. Stop eating beef and lamb. Whatever pace you move at from there, bold or cautious, fast or slow, every choice that lightens the load matters. Not because it makes you righteous, but because the planet feels it.